India. We are joined in our studios by three distinguished guests. Please welcome Mr. Lalit Mansingh, a former Foreign Secretary, also a former Indian Ambassador to the US. Well, him is Dr. Sriram Cholia, a Professor and Dean with Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to Insight. And we are also joined by Sandeep Dixit, Senior Journalist, Special Correspondent. Welcome to Insight, Mr. Dixit. Mr. Mansingh, I'd like to begin with you. How significant is Mr. Biden's visit to India, considering it's rare for an American vice president?
Yeah, you can say that, because the last two vice presidents of the United States visited India to attend funerals. That was the assigned objective. This is significant because Vice President has a very special place in this administration. He actually has a role in policy making, particularly in foreign policy. So this visit was intended for three purposes. I think which is coming up in September. Three fronts. There were significant developments. It was a successful visit.
Okay, we'll discuss all of these three points in greater detail a little later. But the vice president's visit.
Yeah, Biden, indisputably, he's like he's been set up within the Obama administration. So I'm sure he's brought that gravitas to India, and he's thinking about how to orient the big picture being our role in the Asia Pacific especially. And I noted, especially in one of his speeches here, he was saying there's no strategic partner and having strategic autonomy. So clearly, he has come with big picture in mind, and that's always good, because we anyway do the nitty well, and we have been trying to overcome some of these hitches that Ambassador Mansingh just mentioned. But then the big picture is always good. So I think he brought that to the table, and that was clearly discussed, and that shows that for it to take off, the economic side is one, then there's the geostrategic one, and I think both seem to have been amply covered. So in that sense, you can...
It signals that in the first time when Mr. John Kerry came, not much movement could be made on a large number of issues. So they decided to have Mr. come here after a fortnight or so of Mr. Kerry's visit, to then take stock of what has happened so far and what should be done. And in this intervening period, we found that FDI had, and before that an American wish list for FDI in retail had been done. So accomplishments were made in the meantime, and then we had Mr. Biden coming over, and as Mr. Mansingh has pointed out, he's a hands-on vice president, just like Indian policy making. So this was not exactly a funeral trip, but more of a trip to re-energize India-US ties, both in the field of relations as well as in the strategic sphere.
We understand he's also considered a friend of India.
Countries now have basically transactional relationships. Person always looks after his country's national interest, and
India's grievances as well. But Mr. Mansingh, there is a general perception that the dynamic, they somewhat seem to have lost their momentum and are in a state of drift. What has led to this so-called, this is perceived drift?
That's exactly why both Kerry and Biden came here, to discuss. There is a drift in the relationship. It's a perception, and it's a real perception. If you go to Washington, half the think tanks will tell you the same thing: it's drifting and has lost its fizz and so on. But it's a perception because you had a big ticket item to the Indo-US nuclear deal. Then after that, there's been nothing as big which has captured the public imagination. Of George W. Bush, who preceded Obama, and Obama, they're different personalities. George Bush, direct, he was pushing for the relationship, was very vocal about it. Obama is much more cerebral. But I think he's said the right things, he's done the right things to believe that the relationship was drifting. So it is not drifting because actually the relationship has widened and deepened. there's a lot of, there are as many as 30 of the United States.
Right.
Is covering almost every aspect of our national relationship. If you look at the history of our foreign policy, I don't think we were as much involved with any other country. The that comes to mind is the erstwhile Soviet Union during the Cold War days, which came as close to what we are having as a strategic partnership. I am not who believes it is drifting, but since the perception is there, you need high-level visits to reinforce the belief that it is not drifting, it is on the right path, and things are happening.
Okay, but Professor Cholia, the relationship is not stuck anywhere, but at the same time, it has lost its be going anywhere in a lot of areas. For instance, in the question of FDI, of course, just ahead of the visit, the government raised FDI caps in some sectors, but then there is also the question of the civil nuclear agreement where the delivered its end of the bargain.
Yeah, you know, I'm reminded of Calvin Coolidge, one of the American presidents in the 1920s, who said the business of the American people is business, right? So there obviously commercial motives have been very, very prominent. And in the last, 22 years since we have liberalized the economy, India is seen as a, potential for American business to sell and invest in a big way. Then there's some disappointment with that. And we have our own domestic problems vis-a-vis attracting foreign investment, which has been drying up. So people at Harvard were all writing things about how this is going to be, the next 1 billion market and all that. But then the point is, of concrete returns, there is, concern on the American side. That's why Biden was talking about protectionism and how trade needs to be open. I mean, if you have set an ambitious target of, say, quintupling the bilateral trade from 100 to 500 billion,
right.
I think a lot of barriers will need to be overcome. So it's natural. I mean, commercial diplomacy always faces bargain. Always, when you liberalize trade or investment regimes, it creates winners and losers on both sides. And to pacify the losers and to bring them on board, it's a ongoing process. So it's
okay.
Work in progress.
Mr. Mansingh, you wanted
The feeling that it's not moving. Let's address this. Is this really true? Look at bilateral trade. Bilateral trade has been a year. It has now reached a level of $100 billion, which is the highest level of trade we have with any country in the world. Okay. Before the nuclear deal we had no access to high-level technology in the United States. This has started flowing in. Look at the defense sector alone. Nearly 50 joint military exercises we held. We have bought nearly $10 billion worth of American military technology in the last few years. Discussions are going.
Mr. Dikshit, I think you would be able to address this question for us. Why is it not making the headlines? Is the media obsessed with big ticket items like the civil nuclear deal?
You're partly right about that, and another reason is economic downturn. And because of the economic downturn, countries become less generous or become protectionist, as they say, in giving things to each other. So because of the economic downturn, the US wants to do things quickly, while because of the in its markets that quickly, it wants to ponder, reflect. But I would add to what Mr. Mansingh has said. In fact, there was this notification issued, and respecting American wishes, this notification was in fact withdrawn. So that's a very big concession that India made to the Americans. Mr. Mansingh has pointed out, defense trade has boomed. The US has given military hardware that is very, very useful for India, because as you know, US is very good in reconnaissance, tracking, lift. So these are the three areas where India has leaned on the US for some. And then of course the US also saw the opportunity that just now our relations with Russia and with China, you know the state of play as it is. So this was a very good opportunity for the US and the India. And as Mr. Mansingh was pointing out, there are a whole lot of engagements. They average about 10 per month.
Right.
And but the main lesson in some movement, Novartis, that's very difficult to give at the moment.
Right.
So they will really have to work their way around the laws. And similarly with nuclear liability, it was not politically handled very well in Parliament at that time, so it became what it has just now. But then Americans are not the only, and the French also in the same soup. And so they'll all be working their way around it. Things will take time because I said it's the economic downturn, because of which countries are not really very generous at the moment.
About the issue of IPR protection and India's civil nuclear liability law a little later, but you're saying everything is fine in the relationship with so much dialogue happening at various levels every year. This is where basically the relationship is driven and not just big ticket items. On that note, we have to take a break in the program. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
So India manages all these relationships, juggles these relationships and manages this.
Okay, Mr. Mansingh, the question of FDI and also the question we are discussing the outcome of Joe Biden's visit to India. Mr. Biden spoke about on a range of issues on Afghanistan, climate change, etc. But this trip, it seems, was really about an issue that is going to bedevil India-US ties in times to come.
Many issues, and economic issues are amongst them. What preceded Biden's visit and Kerry's visit was a growing discontent in American business people about India's policies. And that was sort of boiling over.
Right.
It seemed that American business was now asking the administration to take punitive action against India. They want a lot of economic distress. And that's saying a lot. And a government that is seen to be inactive has taken action.
Right.
Issues on multi-brand retail. Promises have been made on the insurance bill, on the pension bill. Really a lot of activity has taken place, and the government has shown its sincerity in going forward with this reform.
There is a BIT, bilateral investment treaty, which is being discussed. Probably areas where they see a lot of potential. Although again we will be careful because the kind of deregulation